In this final section here, it says I can use the technique completing the square, to put the equation of a circle into the more useful standard form where you can get the center and the radius. So let's go ahead and pick an example problem, and we'll just go ahead and start out with the first one here. We're going to use completing the square all the way across this equation to figure out what it looks like so that we can find the center and we can find the radius more easily. If you want to check back at your notes, your first step says you need to get all of the terms with variables, the x squared, the x, the y squared, the y, all on one side. You need to get your constant, your number, on the other side. So my terms that have a variable in it, all of these four, I'm going to move them all to the left side. And my term with that as a number, I'm going to move that to the right side. So it looks like my x squared and my 30x are already on the right side, or well, the correct side, the left side. The y's are on the wrong side in this case. I want to move them over, so I would add y squared to both sides, allowing me to get y squared over here. I would subtract 16y from both sides, allowing me to get that over on the left. And then on the other side, I want to move this to the other side here, so I'm going to subtract 285 from both sides, leaving me with negative 285 over here on the right. You'll notice I did something interesting. When I wrote it out, I put the x squared and the x term next to each other, the y squared and the y term next to each other, and I left a gap next to the x's. I left a gap next to the y's. I left those intentionally because I'm going to be putting a number in those spots. The next thing I do, it says, is I take half of the coefficient of x, I square it, and I add it to both sides. So I'm going to take half of 30, which is 15. I'm going to square it and add it to both sides. 15 squared, plug that in your calculator or do that in your head, is going to be 225. So I add 225 on this side, I add 225 on this side, because I'm not changing the problem, I'm just doing the same thing to both sides of an equation. Same thing over here, I have negative 8 is half of the coefficient of y. So I'm going to take negative 8 and square it, which is positive 64. So add 64, and if I'm going to add something arbitrarily to one side, I have to add it to the other side as well to make sure that I'm still equal. And so I modified this problem from the original part to add the 225 and the 64 to both sides. The reason I did that is now, the last step is I'm going to factor down my x group. And it's going to factor into x plus 15 squared. How do I know that? It's always going to be x plus half of that coefficient of x, in this case 15. Plus, I'm going to have my y's. I'm going to have y plus, in this case, negative 8. So y minus 8 plus a negative 8, or just minus 8, squared in parentheses. And that's all going to equal what this cleans up to. I need to clean up this into a single number. So I take negative 285 and I add 225 and I add 64. I plug that all in my calculator and it comes out to almost 0, not quite, it comes out to 4. And when I do that, you'll recognize this as a nice cleaned up form of a circle. So if I need to, I still identify my center and my radius. My center is going to come from the opposite of this and opposite of this, the terms that make these groups go to 0. So negative 15 would make the x group go to 0. Positive 8 would make the y group go to 0. That is my center of my circle. My radius is the square root of this, because this number 4 represents r squared. So if I square root both sides, then my radius is going to equal 2. So that would be how you find the center and radius by completing the square. Feel free to refer to your notes. I encourage you to refer to your notes to make sure that you're doing all your steps right. You'll notice that these problems can get pretty big. Hopefully there's enough space. You're going to want to write a little bit small. Feel free to use a separate sheet of paper if you need it.